The world just sent Donald Trump a message he wasn't expecting. While the president threatened Canada with 100% tariffs, India and the European Union announced a historic trade deal specifically designed to bypass American pressure. While Trump called Canada's Prime Minister Governor Carney and suggested making Canada the 51st state, Mark Carney stood before global leaders in Davos and warned about the dangers of coercion by great powers. And here's what makes this moment so significant. Countries aren't just complaining about Trump's tariffs anymore. They're actively building new trade relationships that exclude the United States entirely. They're forming economic alliances designed to weather American pressure. They're creating a new global trade architecture where America isn't at the center. This is the story of how Trump's aggressive tariff strategy may have created exactly what he claimed to oppose: a world where American influence is declining, where allies are moving on without us, and where the economic power we once wielded is being redirected around us rather than through us. Let's examine what's happening, why it matters, and what this means for America's economic future. According to reports from multiple sources, the situation escalated dramatically over the past week. Trump threatened Canada with 100% tariffs if Prime Minister Mark Carney proceeds with a trade agreement with China. That's not a typo. 100%. Essentially doubling the cost of every Canadian product sold in America. The stated reason? Trump claims Canada's trying to become what he calls a drop-off port for Chinese goods to enter the United States while avoiding American tariffs on China. In Trump's view, Canada negotiated a deal with China to lower tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles in exchange for reduced import taxes on Canadian agricultural products, and this somehow threatens American economic security. But here's where the story gets interesting. Just 1 week earlier, according to reporters at the White House, Trump praised this exact same deal. When asked about Canada's negotiations with China, Trump reportedly said, "That's what he should be doing. It's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that." So within 7 days, the same agreement went from being a good thing that Carney should be doing to a threat worthy of 100% tariffs. What changed? According to observers, what changed was Mark Carney's speech in Davos. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, Carney delivered what many interpreted as a direct challenge to Trump's approach to international relations. According to transcripts of his remarks, Carney said that middle powers must act together because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. He warned about coercion by great powers, without mentioning Trump by name, but the implication was clear to everyone listening. Carney described what's happening as a rupture, not a transition, between the United States under Trump and its traditional Western allies. He suggested this rupture might be permanent, that the relationships being damaged now may never fully recover. Trump's response, according to his posts on Truth Social, was characteristically blunt. "Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements." This escalating war of words matters because it's not happening in isolation. While Trump and Carney traded barbs, something significant was happening behind the scenes. Countries were making moves. According to reports published yesterday, India and the European Union finalized a comprehensive trade agreement. This deal has been under negotiation for 2 decades, but it came together remarkably quickly over the past few weeks. The timing, according to analysts, is not coincidental. The India-EU agreement is explicitly designed, according to statements from both parties, to deepen economic ties and offset the impact of Trump's tariffs. It's a direct response to American trade pressure. Both India and the EU are essentially saying, if the United States wants to impose tariffs and make trade difficult, we'll simply trade more with each other. And here's why this matters. India has been in trade negotiations with the United States for months. Those talks, according to reports, have been fragile and difficult. Trump and Indian officials haven't been able to reach comprehensive agreement despite repeated attempts. Meanwhile, India finalized a deal with the EU in a matter of weeks, once both parties decided to prioritize it. The message is clear. When countries want to make deals, they can make deals. The difficulty in negotiating with the United States isn't about technical trade issues. It's about Trump's approach to negotiations itself. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, speaking on Sunday, according to media reports, accused Carney of an about-face and criticized the Canadian Prime Minister's Davos speech. Bessent reportedly said, "I'm not sure what Prime Minister Carney is doing here, other than trying to virtue signal to his globalist friends at Davos." That phrase, globalist friends, reveals something important about how the Trump administration views international cooperation. To them, countries working together to solve shared problems is virtue signaling rather than smart diplomacy. Building relationships with trading partners is somehow suspicious rather than strategic. But while the Trump administration criticizes globalism, the rest of the world is getting on with business. Canada, according to public statements from Carney's office, maintains that its agreement with China is entirely consistent with the Canada-United States-Mexico trade agreement. Dominic LeBlanc, Canada's minister responsible for U.S. trade, stated that Canada and China resolved several important trade issues, but emphasized there is no pursuit of a comprehensive free trade agreement. Carney reiterated on Sunday, according to reporters, that Canada respects its obligations under CUSMA, that's what Canadians call the USMCA, and will not pursue free trade with China without notifying the other parties. In other words, Canada is following the rules of the existing trade agreement while still pursuing its own economic interests. The problem, from Trump's perspective, seems to be that Canada is pursuing any independent trade policy at all. Trump has repeatedly joked about Canada becoming the 51st state. He's called Carney governor instead of prime minister in multiple posts. He's suggested that Canada lives because of the United States. This rhetoric matters because it reveals an underlying assumption that allied countries should defer to American preferences even when those preferences conflict with their own economic interests. That Canada, despite being a sovereign nation and close ally, should essentially ask permission before making trade decisions. And increasingly, countries are responding to that assumption by simply ignoring it. The India-EU deal isn't the only example. According to reports, Latin American countries are also adjusting their trade strategies. Several nations are diversifying their export markets, strengthening logistics networks to emerging economies, and improving relationships with China. As one analysis noted, Latin America is heading into 2026 in a better position to withstand trade shocks from Washington precisely because they've reduced their dependence on the American market. This is the opposite of what Trump's tariff strategy was supposed to accomplish. The stated goal was to bring manufacturing back to America, to make other countries more dependent on U.S. markets, to strengthen America's negotiating position. But the actual result appears to be pushing countries to build trade relationships that specifically exclude the United States. The numbers tell part of the story. According to analysis from the Tax Foundation, Trump's tariffs amount to an average tax increase of approximately $1,500 per U.S. household in 2026. These aren't taxes paid by foreign countries, despite Trump's claims. They're taxes paid by American consumers when they purchase imported goods. The tariffs have been imposed, according to documented executive orders, using International Emergency Economic Powers Act authority. This is controversial because IEEPA was designed for genuine national emergencies, not routine trade disputes. Multiple courts, according to reports, have challenged the legality of Trump's unlimited emergency tariff authority, though the administration has been quick to appeal these rulings. Meanwhile, the economic impact on American industries is mounting. Canada, according to data, is the top export destination for 36 U.S. states. Nearly $3.6 billion Canadian. That's about $2.7 billion U.S. dollars worth of goods and services cross the U.S.-Canada border each day. About 60% of U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada. 85% of U.S. electricity imports are Canadian. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of steel, aluminum, and uranium to the United States. 100% tariffs on Canadian goods wouldn't just hurt Canada, they would devastate American industries that depend on Canadian inputs. But beyond the immediate economic impact, there's a deeper strategic question. What happens when America's closest allies decide they can't rely on the United States for stable trade relationships? Mark Carney's Davos speech addressed this directly. According to his prepared remarks, he warned that middle powers, countries like Canada, Australia, South Korea, and various European nations, need to cooperate more closely because they can't depend on great powers acting responsibly. When he said, "If you're not at the table, you're on the menu," he was suggesting that countries need to band together for mutual protection. This is a remarkable shift. For decades, the basic structure of global trade assumed American leadership. Even when countries disagreed with U.S. policies, they generally operated within a framework where America was the central negotiating partner. Deals were made with U.S. interests in mind. Trade routes were designed around American markets. What we're seeing now is the emergence of an alternative framework. One where countries still trade with the United States when it makes sense, but where they're no longer organizing their entire economic strategies around American preferences. The EU-India deal is Exhibit A. This is a comprehensive trade agreement between the world's largest democratic nation and a bloc representing 450 million consumers. It doesn't require American approval. It doesn't depend on American participation. It's designed specifically to work whether the U.S. is cooperative or not. And this is just the beginning. According to various reports, other countries are in discussions about similar arrangements. The goal isn't to punish the United States. It's to create economic stability that doesn't depend on whoever happens to be in the White House. From one perspective, you could argue Trump is achieving exactly what he promised, making countries negotiate deals. Canada made a deal with China. India made a deal with the EU. Deals are happening. The problem is that none of these deals particularly benefit the United States, and some of them explicitly reduce American leverage. Trump's threats have succeeded in getting attention. 100% tariffs definitely make headlines. Calling Allied leaders governor instead of prime minister definitely gets noticed. But attention isn't the same as influence. Getting countries to respond to your pressure isn't the same as getting them to do what you want. In fact, there's growing evidence that Trump's aggressive approach is producing the opposite of its intended effect. Rather than bringing countries to the table eager to make deals favorable to America, it's pushing them to create alternatives to American trade relationships. Canadian Prime Minister Carney has been particularly vocal about this. In his Davos speech, he explicitly rejected what he characterized as autocratic tendencies in international relations. He suggested that Canada could be an example of a different approach, one based on cooperation rather than coercion. This framing is significant because it positions the trade dispute as being about values, not just economics. Carney isn't just saying Trump's tariffs are bad policy. He's saying Trump's approach represents a fundamental threat to the rules-based international order that has maintained peace and prosperity for decades. Whether you agree with that characterization or not, it's clearly resonating with other countries. The India-EU deal, the various Latin American adaptations, the discussions among middle powers about cooperation. These aren't just economic adjustments. They're strategic realignments based on a belief that the United States under Trump isn't a reliable partner. And once those realignments happen, they're difficult to reverse. If India and the EU create deep trade relationships, American companies have less leverage in both markets. If Canada diversifies away from dependence on U.S. trade, American tariff threats become less effective. If Latin American countries strengthen ties with China, U.S. influence in the hemisphere declines. This is the real cost of Trump's tariff strategy. Not the immediate economic impact, significant as that is, but the long-term erosion of American influence as countries build systems designed to function without U.S. participation. There's an irony here that's hard to miss. Trump ran on a platform of America first, putting American interests ahead of international cooperation. The argument was that previous administrations had been too concerned with maintaining alliances and not concerned enough with direct American economic benefit. But by prioritizing short-term American leverage over long-term relationships, Trump may be ensuring that America has less influence in the future. By treating allies as adversaries who need to be threatened into compliance, he's convincing those allies to find alternatives to American partnership. The India-EU trade deal is a perfect example. Both India and the EU wanted to make deals with the United States. But faced with Trump's unpredictable tariff policy and confrontational negotiating style, they decided it was smarter to make a deal with each other. American companies will now face stiffer competition in both markets, while having no say in the rules that govern trade between them. Is this America first, or is it America sidelined? The coming months will be crucial. Trump has threatened 100% tariffs on Canada if Carney proceeds with the China agreement. If Trump follows through, the economic consequences would be severe for both countries. Supply chains would be disrupted. Prices would spike. Industries dependent on cross-border trade would face crisis. But the political consequences might be even more significant. Other countries would see definitive proof that American trade policy is driven by presidential whims rather than strategic interests. Every allied nation would ask themselves, if Trump can threaten Canada with 100% tariffs over a trade deal he praised just a week earlier, what might he threaten us with? And the answer to that question will drive more countries to pursue exactly the kind of trade diversification we're already seeing. More deals that exclude the United States. More economic partnerships designed to reduce dependence on American markets. More strategic realignments away from U.S. leadership. This is how empires decline, not through military defeat, but through the slow erosion of influence as former partners decide they're better off without you. Mark Carney warned about a rupture in the relationship between the United States and its allies. That rupture is happening in real time. The India-EU deal, the Latin American adaptations, the middle power cooperation. These aren't temporary adjustments to Trump's policies. They're structural changes in how the global economy operates. Whether Trump intended this outcome or not, it's the outcome his policies are producing. Countries are fighting back against American tariff threats, not by surrendering, but by building alternatives. And once those alternatives exist, once countries prove they can thrive without centering their economies around American preferences, reversing that trend becomes extraordinarily difficult. The world is fighting back against Trump's tariffs, but they're not fighting the way Trump expected. They're not begging for better terms. They're not offering concessions. They're simply moving on, building new partnerships, creating new trade routes, establishing new economic relationships. And America is increasingly finding itself on the outside looking in. The question is, will we recognize what's happening before the damage becomes permanent? Or will we continue down this path until America first becomes America alone? The next few months will tell us everything we need to know about whether this administration understands the difference between attention and influence, between making threats and achieving objectives, between short-term leverage and long-term strategy. The world is watching, and increasingly, the world is deciding it has better options than dealing with American unpredictability. That's the real story behind the India-EU trade deal. That's the real meaning of Carney's Davos speech. That's the real consequence of Trump's tariff threats. The world isn't surrendering to American pressure. It's learning to live without American partnership. And that may be the most significant geopolitical shift of the entire Trump presidency.